The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the narrow mountain roads into rivers of mud and memory. Eva Thorne gripped the steering wheel of her 15-year-old sedan with white knuckles, her pregnant belly pressing uncomfortably against the worn fabric. In the passenger seat, 8-year-old Rose sat perfectly still, the kind of unnatural stillness that only comes from a child who has learned that silence keeps monsters at bay. Through the rearview mirror, headlights blazed too close, too bright. The black SUV had been following them for 20 minutes now, maintaining a distance that was neither coincidental nor comfortable. Eva's foot pressed harder on the accelerator, but the old engine could only give so much. The vehicle behind matched her speed with ease, a predator toying with prey it knew couldn't escape. 6 hours earlier, she had stood in the foyer of Helena Blackwood's Georgian Revival mansion, raindrops just beginning to tap against the mullioned windows. Her mother-in-law had descended the curved staircase with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to delivering verdicts from on high. Helena wore black. She had worn nothing but black since Nathaniel's funeral 6 months ago, and her silver hair was pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her skin taut across aristocratic cheekbones. "Pack your things. You have 1 hour." Eva's hand had moved instinctively to her swollen belly, 7 months of new life pressing against a world that suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. "But we have nowhere to go." The words came out smaller than she intended, the plea of someone who already knew the answer. Helena's smile had been winter itself. "Not my problem. Nathaniel is dead. You're nothing to this family." Behind Helena, Clarence had stood in the shadows of the upper landing, his hands gripping the banister. At 30, he still had the posture of a scolded child, shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. His eyes had met Eva's for just a moment, something that might have been apology flickering there, before he looked away, his jaw working silently. Whatever words he might have wanted to say died unspoken, crushed under the weight of a lifetime of submission. Eva had climbed the stairs past both of them, moving toward the guest room she and Rose had occupied since the funeral. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, operating on autopilot while her mind tried to process what was happening. She had $28 in her wallet. Her car had a check engine light that had been on for 3 months. Rose hadn't been to school in weeks because Eva couldn't afford the private academy Helena had insisted upon, and the public school said they needed proof of residence she didn't have. The packing took 30 minutes. Everything they owned fit into 2 canvas duffel bags, a humiliating inventory of how little they had accumulated, how completely Nathaniel's death had stripped them down to essentials, and then passed them into pure poverty. Eva moved through the room mechanically, folding Rose's few dresses, gathering the coloring books and broken crayons that were her daughter's only toys. In the bathroom, she swept toiletries into a plastic grocery bag, not bothering to sort or organize. Speed mattered more than order now. Rose appeared in the doorway as Eva was zipping the second bag. She held something in her hands, turning it over with the careful attention children give to objects they don't quite understand. "Grandmother gave me this, said I should remember where I came from." The photograph was old, the kind taken with an instant camera, its colors fading to the soft pastels of aged chemicals. 3 figures stood before the Blackwood mansion in what must have been summer, the trees behind them full and green, shadows short beneath a high sun. On the left, a young Nathaniel smiled with an openness Eva had only seen in their most private moments. His arm was around Helena, who looked perhaps 40, beautiful in the way that comes from expensive maintenance and the confidence of never having wanted for anything. But it was the figure on the right that made Eva's breath catch. The face had been scratched out with such violence that the photograph's surface was torn through in places, leaving only a vague, human-shaped outline. Someone had taken a sharp object, a key perhaps, or a nail, and obliterated every feature with methodical fury. The destruction was precise, contained only to that one figure, making the violence of it somehow worse than if the entire image had been ruined. Eva took the photo from Rose's hands, studying the savagery of those scratches. This wasn't the casual defacement of a forgotten picture. This was hatred made physical, rage given form and persistence. Someone had spent time on this, returning to it again and again until the person's face ceased to exist. Why would grandmother give you this? Rose's shoulders lifted in the slight shrug of a child who had stopped expecting adult behavior to make sense. She said, "Family is important. That I should never forget." The words carried a message Eva couldn't quite decode, some threat or promise wrapped in the guise of a gift. Helena didn't do anything without calculation. Every gesture served a purpose. Every word landed like a chess piece, moving into position for some future gambit. This photograph was meant to communicate something. But what? A warning? A boast? A reminder of some old wound that Eva knew nothing about? She had slipped the photo into her purse alongside the other thing Nathaniel had given her. The envelope she had carried for 6 months without opening, growing heavier with each passing day, despite weighing less than an ounce. The envelope he had pressed into her hands the night before he died, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so ravaged by cancer. Promise me you won't open this until you have absolutely no choice. When that time comes, you'll know. Promise me, Eva." She had promised, even as she watched the fear in his eyes, the terrible knowledge of something he couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. He had died 18 hours later, taking his secrets with him, leaving only that envelope and the desperate hope that she would somehow understand what he couldn't explain. Now the SUV's headlights filled the rearview mirror again, and Eva jerked the wheel hard to the right, taking a side road she barely saw in time. The tires screamed against wet asphalt, and Rose grabbed the door handle with a small gasp. The black vehicle shot past the turn, brake lights flashing red in the darkness, and for a moment Eva thought they had escaped. But then it reversed with the smooth efficiency of a vehicle that knew these roads far better than she did, turning to follow. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely keep the car straight. The side road was narrower, darker, tree branches scraping against the windows as she pushed deeper into the forest. Rain hammered the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. The envelope in her purse seemed to pulse with heat, as if Nathaniel's final words were trying to burn their way out. "Mommy, I'm scared." Rose's voice was barely a whisper, and Eva wanted to tell her daughter that everything would be okay, that they would be safe, that the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed in this moment. But she had promised herself she wouldn't lie to Rose anymore. The girl had seen her father waste away over 9 months, had watched her mother work herself to exhaustion trying to pay for treatments that ultimately failed, had stood graveside in a borrowed black dress because Eva couldn't afford to buy one. Rose deserved better than false comfort now. "I know, baby, I'm scared too. But we're going to be okay. We have to be." The road opened suddenly into a wider highway, and Eva took the turn too fast, feeling the car fishtail before the tires caught. The SUV had fallen back, its headlights dim in the distance, and she pushed the accelerator to the floor. The engine's protest was audible over the rain, a grinding whine that spoke of too many miles and too little maintenance. But it held, carrying them forward through the storm, putting distance between them and whoever Helena had sent to follow. 40 minutes later, Eva pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Motel, a collection of single-story units painted a faded turquoise that might have been cheerful decades ago when someone still cared. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly, pink letters buzzing like dying insects. She counted the bills in her wallet twice, as if the second count might somehow yield different results. $47. The number felt both impossibly small and like more money than she deserved. The motel office smelled of burnt coffee and decades of cigarette smoke that had soaked into every surface. Behind the counter sat a woman whose face mapped her own journey through hardship, deep lines carved around eyes that had seen too much to judge anyone else's desperation. She looked at Eva, then at Rose's frightened face pressed against her mother's side, then at Eva's obvious pregnancy. Something softened in her expression, a recognition of shared understanding that crossed the counter like an invisible handshake. $40 for the night. The woman poured stale coffee into 2 styrofoam cups without being asked, and produced a handful of crackers wrapped in cellophane from a drawer behind the desk. She pushed them across the scarred laminate with a gentleness that spoke of having once stood exactly where Eva stood now, of knowing that sometimes the smallest kindness is the only thing standing between survival and surrender. The room was a rectangle of faded despair, its walls the color of old dishwater, decorated with water stains that spread across the ceiling like brown continents on a map of nowhere. The carpet felt sticky beneath Eva's feet as she helped Rose out of damp clothes and wrapped her in a thin towel that was scratchy, but at least dry. The heater beneath the window rattled and wheezed, producing more noise than warmth, but Eva was grateful for even the mechanical heartbeat in a space that felt otherwise lifeless. She pulled Rose onto the sagging double bed, ignoring the protest of her pregnant body, holding her daughter close. Rose's voice broke the silence that had stretched between them since they left Helena's mansion. "Why did grandmother make us leave?" The question carried the pure incomprehension of an 8-year-old who couldn't fathom why family would turn cruel, why love would transform into ice, why the home she had known since her father died would suddenly become a place where she was unwanted. Eva felt the words like a blade sliding between her ribs, sharp and cold. But she forced her face into a smile that felt like cracking glass. "Grandmother is going through a very hard time, sweetheart. She needs some space to heal. We need to give her that. We're going to be just fine. You and me and the baby. We're going to have our own adventure." The lie tasted bitter, necessary. Rose was too young to understand that some people's hearts were made of stone, that grief could twist into vindictive ugliness, that Helena had looked at her pregnant daughter-in-law and grandchild not with compassion, but with cold calculation. The truth would come soon enough. For now, let her believe in grandmothers who were simply sad rather than sociopathic. Rose seemed to accept the explanation, or perhaps simply chose to believe it because the alternative was too frightening. She curled against Eva's chest, her thumb finding its way to her mouth in a habit she had abandoned 2 years ago, but now reclaimed as comfort. As her daughter's breathing deepened into sleep, Eva carefully laid her on the bed and covered her with both the motel blanket and their own thin one from the car, creating a cocoon that might keep the cold at bay for a few hours. The envelope sat on the nightstand beside the lamp with its stained shade, and its presence seemed to fill the entire room. Eva moved to the window, parting the heavy curtain just enough to see the parking lot where their car sat alone beneath a flickering streetlight. The black SUV was nowhere in sight, but she knew it hadn't gone far. Helena's reach was long, her resources vast. Whatever game was being played, Eva was already several moves behind, scrambling to understand rules she didn't know existed. She allowed herself to remember Nathaniel's final days in the hospital, the way cancer had consumed him from within, despite the doctor's best efforts. She had sat beside his bed day after day, holding his hand and telling him stories about Rose, about the baby growing inside her, about the future they would never share. But in those final weeks, something had changed in his eyes. He had become anxious, almost frantic at times, and she would catch him staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, something that looked like fear mixed with desperate love and terrible regret. He would open his mouth as if to speak, words hovering on his lips, but then he would close it again and turn away. She knew he was holding something back, some secret that weighed on him like stones in deep water. 3 nights before he died, he had gripped her hand with surprising strength and pressed the envelope into her palm. His voice, already weakened to a whisper by disease ravaging his lungs, had been urgent and clear. "Promise me you'll keep this safe. Don't open it until you have no other choice. When that time comes, you'll know. Promise me." She had promised, confused but willing to give him this final piece. He had relaxed slightly, though the fear never quite left his eyes. Now, standing in this dismal room with $7 left to her name, her daughter sleeping fitfully, and nowhere to go when morning came, Eva wondered if this was the moment Nathaniel had foreseen. If this desperation was the key that should unlock whatever secrets that envelope contained. But still, she couldn't bring herself to break her promise. Not yet. Not while some small, stubborn part of her believed that tomorrow might bring something better. Some solution she hadn't yet imagined. Some path forward that wouldn't require betraying the last wish of the man she loved. Morning came too quickly, weak sunlight filtering through thin curtains and doing nothing to soften harsh reality. Eva counted the 7 remaining dollars, spreading the bills on the nightstand as if staring at them might somehow multiply their value. Rose sat cross-legged on the bed, her small face solemn as she worked on a drawing with 2 broken crayons Eva had salvaged from the bottom of her purse, creating pictures of houses with smiling families that felt like accusations of everything Eva had failed to provide. The motel clerk had told Eva they could stay 1 more night without paying, a kindness that brought tears, but also the knowledge that charity had limits, and tomorrow they would be back in the car unless she found work immediately. She dressed in her cleanest outfit, a simple blue blouse that stretched tight across her pregnant belly, and a pair of black pants held together with a safety pin where the button no longer closed. She brushed her hair until it shone, trying to create an illusion of capability and normalcy, despite the exhaustion that carved shadows beneath her eyes. She left Rose with strict instructions to stay in the room, to not open the door for anyone, to draw and rest and be brave. The look of fear in her daughter's eyes as Eva closed the door behind her was almost enough to break her resolve entirely. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Eva walked its main street with desperate purpose. The hardware store owner took one look at her condition and shook his head before she even finished asking. The grocery store manager, a thin man with suspicious eyes, told her they only hired locals with references, his tone making it clear that a pregnant stranger qualified as neither. At a small boutique, the owner actually laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. Customers don't want to be served by someone who looks like they might give birth between the changing rooms and the cash register. Each rejection was a stone added to the weight Eva carried. By the time she reached the 4th establishment, she was fighting to keep desperation from showing on her face. She found herself on a park bench, hands trembling, staring at the $7 that wouldn't even buy lunch for 2. Across the street, a man in an expensive charcoal suit stood beside a black sedan. Not the SUV from last night, but close enough that her heart lurched. He wasn't hiding his interest. He raised a camera with a telephoto lens and took several photographs of her, his expression neutral, professional. Eva stood, fury overriding fear. She crossed the street with as much dignity as her pregnant waddle allowed, but by the time she reached the spot where he had been standing, he was gone. Only a business card remained on the bench, crisp and new. Blackwood Security Services, with a phone number and nothing else. The message was clear. Helena knew where she was. Helena was watching. Helena was patient. The last building on Main Street was a diner called Dot's Place. Chrome and red vinyl, with a long counter lined with stools and booths along the windows, offering views of passing traffic in the gray November sky. The lunch rush was just beginning, and through the window, Eva could see waitresses moving efficiently between tables with plates of food that made her stomach clench with hunger she had been trying to ignore. She pushed through the door, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon was so overwhelming in its normalcy, its promise of sustenance and simple comfort, that she had to pause and steady herself. Behind the counter stood a woman who could only be Dorothy, her gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, her face weathered but strong, wearing a white apron over jeans and a flannel shirt. When she looked up and met Eva's eyes, something passed between them, a recognition that transcended words. Eva approached, her prepared speech about willingness to work hard and learn quickly already forming on her lips. But before she could begin, Dorothy raised a hand to stop her. "You look like you need coffee and a meal before we talk about anything else." The kindness in those words, so unexpected after the morning's harsh rejections, almost undid Ava completely. But she forced herself to nod and accept, sliding onto a stool that creaked under her weight. Dorothy poured coffee, black and strong, and slid a plate of eggs and toast across the counter without being asked, without expecting payment. While Ava ate with as much dignity as she could muster despite her ravenous hunger, Dorothy worked and watched, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Not the worn clothes or the trembling hands or the obvious bulge of pregnancy that other employers had used as an excuse to turn her away. When Ava finished, Dorothy leaned against the counter. "Can you work hard? Can you show up on time? Can you treat customers with respect, even when they don't deserve it?" Eva answered yes to all three, her voice steady despite the hope building in her chest, like a fragile bird testing its wings. "I need someone in the kitchen washing dishes and bussing tables. When you're not too tired, you can help wait tables during dinner rush. I pay cash at the end of each day. Nothing fancy, but enough to get by if you're careful. You start now." The relief that flooded through Eva was so powerful, so overwhelming, that she barely managed to thank Dorothy before rushing to the bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and wept silently, her shoulders shaking with sobs that were equal parts gratitude and the release of fear she had been carrying since the moment Helena's door had slammed in her face. For the first time since Nathaniel died, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she and Rose might actually survive this after all. The work at Dot's Diner was exhausting in a way that Eva's body, already strained by pregnancy and stress, struggled to endure. But it was also salvation, each day bringing a small handful of cash that meant another night at the motel, another meal, another tiny step away from the abyss that had nearly swallowed them whole. By the end of her first week, Eva's hands were raw from dishwater, and her feet ached in a way that made every step a small agony. But Rose's drawings had begun to include smiling suns again, and that alone made every moment of pain worthwhile. The black sedan appeared again on Tuesday afternoon, parked across from the diner where Eva could see it through the window. The same man sat inside, camera raised, documenting her movements with professional detachment. Dorothy noticed, her jaw tightening. "That's not normal. Someone's watching you." Eva's hands shook as she carried a tray of dirty dishes to the kitchen. She knew Helena wouldn't simply accept defeat, wouldn't let her son's widow and children disappear into obscurity with what Helena undoubtedly considered rightfully hers. But knowing surveillance was coming and experiencing it were different things entirely. The camera felt like a violation, each photograph another piece of evidence being compiled for some future attack she couldn't predict or prepare for. By the second week, the work was taking a visible toll. Eva's face had hollowed, dark circles permanent beneath her eyes. Her hands developed a tremor that made carrying full trays dangerous. She was slower moving between tables, her pregnant belly throwing off her balance, her body demanding rest she couldn't afford to take. Dorothy watched with increasing concern, but said nothing, perhaps understanding that sometimes the only thing worse than working yourself to exhaustion is having nothing to work for at all. On Thursday afternoon, as Eva fumbled with the motel room key while balancing a paper bag containing dinner Dorothy had insisted she take home, she noticed the man in the room next door. He was elderly, perhaps mid-70s, with a full head of white hair neatly combed and a face that reminded Eva of her own grandfather. All kind wrinkles and gentle eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to understand that judgment helped no one. "Evening, ma'am. I'm Augustus Pemberton. Folks call me Gus. I've been meaning to introduce myself properly." Eva managed a tired smile, shifting Rose's weight against her hip as her daughter clung to her with the exhaustion of a long day spent confined to a small room. "Eva, and this is Rose." Over the next few days, she would see Gus in passing, And each time he would offer a friendly greeting, never intrusive but always present, a steady, reassuring presence in a world that had proven itself unstable and cruel. On the following Tuesday, as Eva returned from her shift at the diner, with Rose dragging her feet behind her, Gus stepped out of his room with an offer that seemed to cost him nothing, but meant everything to a woman who had forgotten what simple human kindness looked like. "I've made a pot of vegetable soup, far too much for one old man. Would you and your daughter do me the honor of helping me eat it? Nothing fancy, just soup and some bread, but it's hot and there's plenty." Eva hesitated, instincts honed by recent cruelty making her suspicious of generosity. But Rose's face had lit up at the mention of food, and the smell drifting from his room was so inviting, so reminiscent of safety and home, that Eva found herself nodding acceptance. His room was identical to theirs in layout, but transformed entirely by the personal touches of someone who had made it a temporary home rather than just a place to sleep. A small table was set with mismatched bowls and spoons, and the soup, thick with vegetables and herbs, steamed in a pot on the single burner he had set up in the corner. They ate together, and Gus filled the space with gentle stories about his late wife Martha, how they had traveled across the country in an old RV for 3 years after his retirement, how she had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 winters ago, how he now spent his time moving from place to place because staying still in their old house made her absence too loud to bear. He asked Rose about her drawings, admired her artwork with genuine interest, and made her laugh with silly voices and old jokes that shouldn't have been funny, but somehow were when delivered with his grandfatherly warmth. As Rose's eyelids grew heavy and she curled up on Gus's bed, he gently draped a threadbare blanket over her and turned to Eva with eyes that saw far too much. "I don't mean to pry, but I've been around long enough to recognize trouble when I see it. You're running from something or someone. You don't have to tell me if you'd rather not, but sometimes it helps to share the weight." Eva felt tears prick her eyes, and perhaps it was the exhaustion or the kindness or simply the desperate need to tell someone, anyone, that her life had fallen apart through no fault of her own. She found herself speaking, telling him about Nathaniel, about their quiet, happy life, about the cancer that took him too soon, about the 6 months of grief that followed. She told him about Helena, about the cold rejection, about being thrown out with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a handful of dollars. What she didn't tell him, what she kept locked away in the deepest part of her heart, was about the envelope that still sat on her nightstand in the room next door, the secret Nathaniel had died protecting, the mystery she was not yet desperate enough to unravel. The 3rd week at Dot's Diner had begun to establish a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy. Eva was refilling coffee cups during lunch rush on Wednesday when she felt the weight of eyes upon her, that primitive instinct that tells a person when they're being watched. She looked up and through the large front window, spotted the same man from before standing on the sidewalk across the street. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Eva made in 6 months. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture rigid with the confidence of someone accustomed to power and getting exactly what he wanted. He wasn't looking at the diner generally, but specifically at her, his gaze fixed and unwavering. When their eyes met through the glass, he didn't look away or pretend he had been admiring something else. He simply stared, his expression unreadable, and Eva felt ice slide down her spine despite the warmth of the diner. She turned away, forcing her trembling hands to steady as she continued her work. When she glanced back 10 minutes later, he was gone, leaving only the unsettling certainty that his presence had not been coincidental. That night, Eva collapsed on the motel bed fully clothed, too exhausted to even remove her shoes. Rose was already asleep, clutching the defaced photograph Helena had given her, the mysterious 3rd figure with the scratched-out face. Eva had tried to take it away several times, disturbed by the violence of those scratches, but Rose clung to it like a talisman. "Family is important," her daughter would say, parroting Helena's words without understanding their twisted meaning. Eva stared at the envelope on the nightstand. 3 weeks since Helena had thrown them out. 3 weeks of barely surviving, of working herself toward collapse, of watching Rose's light dim a little more each day. The baby inside her rolled and kicked, oblivious to the precarious circumstances of its impending birth. $7.23 remained in Eva's wallet. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant she would get paid, which meant they could afford another few nights at the motel. But then what? How long could she keep this up? How long before her body simply refused to continue? She reached for the envelope, her fingers brushing the worn manila paper. Nathaniel's handwriting on the outside was fading, the ink smudged from months of handling. The seal was still intact, the tape he had carefully applied still holding. She could open it now, right now, and perhaps find answers to questions she didn't even know to ask. But something stopped her. Not just the promise, though that held weight enough, but rather the memory of Nathaniel's fear, the way his whole body had trembled when he pressed the envelope into her hands, the panic in his voice that suggested opening it too soon might bring consequences worse than ignorance. She set it back on the nightstand, decision made. Tomorrow she would work another shift. Tomorrow she would earn enough for another day. Tomorrow she would keep the promise she had made to a dying man, even if she didn't understand why. The nightmares began that weekend. Rose's small voice crying out in darkness, pulling Eva from her own fitful sleep to find her daughter thrashing against sheets soaked with sweat and tears. "Daddy's gone, Mommy. Daddy's gone and we can't find him." Eva held her close, rocking her like an infant, whispering reassurances that felt hollow because she couldn't promise everything would be fine when she didn't believe it herself. The bedwetting came next. Accidents Rose hadn't experienced since she was 3 years old. The shame in her daughter's eyes each morning as they stripped the sheets together was almost worse than the practical problem of washing and drying them in the motel's coin laundry with money they could barely spare. But what truly terrified Eva was the withdrawal. Rose stopped drawing her pictures of houses and families. She stopped asking questions or requesting stories. She would sit for hours staring at nothing while her small hands twisted the fabric of her shirt into knots. This was not the resilient, bright child who had weathered her father's death with the adaptability of youth. The motel room, with its stained walls and the constant fear of the black sedan in the parking lot, was destroying her daughter in ways that would leave scars no eye could see. Dorothy noticed on Monday morning, when Eva arrived for her shift with Rose in tow, the motel clerk had fallen ill and couldn't watch her. The girl sat in a corner booth, unnaturally quiet while Eva worked. When the lunch rush ended, Dorothy sat Eva down in that same booth with coffee and the kind of straightforward compassion that cut through pretense like a blade through butter. "That child is suffering, and you're killing yourself trying to keep her safe in a place that's not fit for a dog, much less a pregnant woman and a traumatized little girl. I've got an apartment upstairs, been empty since my last tenant moved out 3 months ago. It's small, just 1 bedroom and a kitchen, bathroom needs some work, but it's clean and it's got heat that actually works. I'll rent it to you for what you're making on weekdays, and weekends you work for free to cover the difference. It's not charity, Eva. It's business, because I need someone reliable and you need a real home." Eva wept then, unable to stop tears that came from a well of gratitude so deep she hadn't known it existed. 2 days later, she and Rose packed their meager belongings into the 2 duffel bags and 3 plastic grocery sacks that contained everything they owned in the world. The apartment was indeed small, barely larger than the motel room, but it had windows that looked out over the street and let in actual sunlight. The bedroom had a real closet, and the kitchen had a stove that worked. To Eva, it felt like a palace after weeks of the Riverside Motel's oppressive grimness. As she unpacked Rose's backpack, shaking out the few clothes her daughter owned, and folding them carefully into the dresser drawer Dorothy had left behind, the defaced photograph slipped out from between 2 shirts and fell to the floor. Eva picked it up, her breath catching in her throat. She had seen it before, But something about the light in the apartment made the violence of those scratches more apparent. This wasn't casual damage. This was methodical destruction. Someone returning to the image again and again until the person's face ceased to exist. She called Rose over, keeping her voice carefully neutral, despite the ice forming in her veins. "Sweetheart, where did you get this picture?" Rose looked at it, her small face troubled. "Grandmother gave it to me the day before we left. She said I should keep it to remember the family, to remember where I came from. She said Daddy would want me to have it." Eva studied the photograph as Rose returned to arranging her few toys in the corner. Who was the person whose face had been destroyed with such deliberate hatred? Why had Helena given this defaced image to an innocent child? What message was embedded in this act of violence against a photograph? And what did it have to do with the envelope that even now sat in her purse, Nathaniel's secrets waiting for the moment of absolute necessity that he had foreseen, but Eva had not yet reached? That night, after Rose was asleep in the bedroom, and Eva had made herself a nest of blankets on the living room couch, she sat in darkness and thought about desperation, about how far she had fallen in 3 weeks, about how much further she might yet fall. The baby kicked, a reminder that time was running out. In 2 months, maybe less, she would give birth. And then what? How would she work? Who would watch 2 children? How would she afford diapers and formula and all the 1,000 things a newborn required? Her hand moved to her purse, fingers finding the envelope's edge. The seal was still intact. The promise was still unbroken. But the weight of it had grown unbearable, pressing down on her chest until breathing felt like work. Nathaniel had said she would know when the time came. Had that time arrived? Or was she simply looking for an excuse to break a vow she no longer understood the purpose of keeping? She fell asleep on the couch with the envelope clutched to her chest, and in her dreams Nathaniel was alive again, standing in a house she didn't recognize, calling her name. But every time she tried to reach him, he moved further away, his voice growing fainter, until she was alone in empty rooms that echoed with footsteps that weren't her own. The 4th week began with a crisis Eva should have anticipated but somehow didn't. On Monday morning, she woke on the couch to find her vision swimming, her head pounding with a pressure that felt like her skull might split. She made it to the bathroom before vomiting, her body shaking so violently she had to grip the toilet to stay upright. When she tried to stand, the room tilted sideways, and she sat back down hard, breathing through waves of nausea. Dorothy took one look at her when she stumbled downstairs and immediately closed the diner. "We're going to the clinic. Now. No arguments." The clinic was a small storefront operation 3 blocks away, staffed by a doctor who looked too young to have finished medical school, but whose examination was thorough and professional. He listened to the baby's heartbeat, measured Eva's blood pressure, asked questions about her diet and sleep and stress levels. When he finished, he sat back and fixed her with a look that combined compassion with brutal honesty. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You're malnourished, exhausted, and your body is under a level of stress that is not sustainable. If you continue on this path, you're risking preeclampsia, premature labor, or worse. I'm not just talking about your health, Mrs. Thorne. I'm talking about your baby's survival. Whatever you're doing, whatever you think you have to do, you need to find another way, because this will kill both of you." The words hit Eva like physical blows, each one landing with the weight of truth she had been trying desperately to ignore. As Dorothy drove her home in silence, paid for the visit without comment or expectation of repayment, and hugged her with surprising fierceness before leaving her at the apartment door, Eva felt something crack inside her. That last wall of denial crumbling to reveal the abyss she had been dancing along the edge of for months. Rose was spending the afternoon with Gus, an arrangement that had become their routine. The old man delighted in teaching her card games and letting her watch old movies on his small television. Eva was alone when she finally sat down at the kitchen table and pulled the envelope from her purse. The apartment was silent except for distant sounds of traffic and the hum of the refrigerator. And in that silence, the envelope seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Nathaniel's voice echoed in her memory, as clearly as if he stood beside her. Don't open it until you have no other choice. When that time comes, you'll know. She knew. The doctor's words had been a death sentence delivered with clinical precision, and she understood that she had reached the moment Nathaniel had foreseen, the point where survival required truth, no matter how terrible that truth might be. Her fingers found the edge of the tape that sealed the envelope, and with a prayer that was half plea and half apology to the husband who had tried so hard to protect her, Ava broke the seal and opened the envelope, ready at last to discover what secret had been worth dying to hide. 3 items slipped from the envelope onto the kitchen table. The first was a brass key attached to a white plastic tag stamped with black numbers, 347. The second was a business card embossed with elegant lettering, Jameson Whitmore, Whitmore and Associates Law, with a phone number written in Nathaniel's shaky handwriting. The third item was a letter folded carefully, written on lined notebook paper. Eva blinked away tears before she could read the words her dead husband had left for her. My dearest Eva, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you are in trouble. I'm so sorry. She set the letter down, steadying herself, then forced herself to continue. My real name is Nathaniel Blackwood, not Nathaniel Thorne. Thorne was fabricated. I took it when I ran from my family 7 years ago. You know the Blackwoods, Blackwood Industries, the aerospace manufacturing company. My grandfather William built it. My father Richard ran it. My mother Helena married into it 35 years ago. Eva's breath caught. The Blackwood name was synonymous with wealth and power. And Nathaniel, who had managed a small bookstore and clipped coupons, had been born into that world? When I was 12 years old, I watched my mother murder my father. She pushed him down the main staircase of our family estate, Blackwood Manor. My brother Clarence saw it too. He was 8. We watched our father fall. The page shook in Eva's hands. She threatened us afterward, told us if we ever spoke a word about what we had seen, she would kill us both. Clarence broke under the pressure. He became her puppet. I survived by pretending to forget, by burying the memory so deep I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. But it was real. Eva thought about Clarence standing in Helena's shadows, silent and submissive. A lifetime of fear had hollowed him out. At 22, I ran, changed my name legally, moved to a small town. I worked minimum wage jobs and learned what it meant to be truly free. And then I met you in that bookstore, and you were everything I never knew I was looking for. Tears streamed down Eva's face now, but she kept reading. 5 years ago, Grandfather William found me. He was dying, cancer, same as what eventually took me, and he had spent 20 years trying to gather enough evidence to prosecute my mother for murder. But she's too powerful, too connected. So he decided on a different approach. He changed his will. The letter detailed what that change meant. William's personal fortune, totaling approximately $75 million, would go to Nathaniel upon William's death. The family estate, Blackwood Manor, would also pass to him. Helena and Clarence would receive nothing. The will explicitly stated this was due to credible evidence of criminal conduct. He died 6 months before I got my diagnosis. Mother doesn't know the will exists yet. William had it sealed until my death. When I die, it goes to probate and becomes public record. She'll find out she was cut out completely, that everything is going to you and our children instead. Eva's mind reeled. $75 million. She had been washing dishes for $60 a day while being the rightful heir to a fortune that could have solved every problem. And she'll come for you, Eva. She'll try to destroy you before you can claim what's legally yours. She'll use every resource, lawyers, investigators, connections in law enforcement and government. She'll paint you as unstable, unfit, dangerous. She'll try to take our children through the courts. The letter explained the keys: The brass key marked 347 opened a safety deposit box at First Federal Bank in downtown Nashville. Inside was everything Eva would need. Financial records proving Helena's embezzlement of over $8 million from Blackwood Industries, private investigator reports, and a video testimony Nathaniel had recorded 2 weeks before his death. The second key, smaller with Victorian-era scrollwork, would open William's private study at Blackwood Manor. That room had been sealed after William's death and contained the original documents, William's personal journals spanning 2 decades, correspondence with investigators, photographs and forensic analyses building an irrefutable case against Helena. Go to Jameson Whitmore, show him this letter. He's the only person who knows the whole truth. The manor is yours now, Eva. Legally, unquestionably yours as my widow. Helena can't touch it. The letter's final paragraphs were harder to read through freely flowing tears. I love you, Eva. You gave me 3 years of peace, of feeling like a real human being instead of a pawn in a game I never wanted to play. Rose is the light of my life, and the baby you carry is my hope for redemption. Protect them, fight for them, use what is in that box in that study to build the life I wanted to give you, but couldn't. The manor will be your fortress now. Forgive me for the lies. Forgive me for dying. Your Nathaniel. Eva sat in silence for a long time, staring at the keys and business card, trying to integrate this new reality with everything she thought she knew. Nathaniel had been running from a murderer. He had married her knowing his death would paint a target on her back. But he had also left her the tools to fight back. Rose's laughter drifted up from outside. The sound grounded Eva, reminding her what was at stake. This wasn't about money. This was about survival. She picked up the phone and dialed Jameson Whitmore's number. Whitmore and Associates, how may I direct your call? I need to speak to Jameson Whitmore. It's about Nathaniel Blackwood. A pause. May I ask who's calling? Eva Thorne. I'm Nathaniel's widow. Another pause, then the receptionist's voice returned with new urgency. Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Whitmore has been hoping you would call. He's been trying to locate you for months. Please hold. Less than 30 seconds later, a man's voice came on, rich and warm. Mrs. Thorne, thank God. Thank God you're safe. Nathaniel briefed me 5 years ago when this arrangement was put in place. I've been searching for you since his death. Are you all right? Helena threw us out about a month ago. We've been living in a motel and then a small apartment above a diner. I just opened Nathaniel's envelope. Jameson's response was immediate. William Blackwood's will entered probate 3 weeks ago. Helena's lawyers were notified she's been completely excluded. My sources tell me she's preparing to file for emergency custody of your daughter and unborn child. She'll claim you're unfit, unstable, unable to provide basic necessities. If she controls the children, she controls their money. Eva felt her stomach drop. The surveillance made sense now. How long do I have? Days, maybe a week. We need to move fast. First, you retrieve the contents of that safety deposit box. Second, we get you to Blackwood Manor. It's yours legally, and possession matters. If you're living there, it becomes much harder for her to argue you're homeless or unstable. But I don't have money for lawyers. William set up a legal fund specifically for this. Your representation is already paid for. Can you come to Nashville tomorrow? Eva thought about Rose, about the baby, about the doctor's warning. Tomorrow. Yes, I can be there tomorrow. Dorothy appeared an hour later with dinner. She took one look at Eva's face and set the food down carefully. Something happened. Eva showed her the letter. Dorothy's weathered face cycled through shock and anger, and finally, fierce determination. So you're a millionaire who's been washing my dishes for a month. Eva laughed, a sound that came out more like a sob. I'm a widow trying to keep her kids alive. The money doesn't feel real yet. Dorothy sat down across from her, gripping Eva's hands. Money doesn't make you safe from someone like Helena Blackwood. Money just gives you better weapons to fight with. You're going to have to be strong in ways you didn't know you could be. I don't know if I can. You already did. You just don't see it yet. The woman who walked into my diner wouldn't have opened that envelope, but you opened it. That took courage, and courage is the only currency that matters in a fight like this. The bus to Nashville left at 7 the next morning. Dorothy pressed a sandwich and $100 into Eva's hands, an investment in seeing Helena Blackwood get what she deserved. The old Greyhound rumbled along highways cutting through Tennessee countryside. Eva pressed her forehead against the cold window, mind spinning with possibilities and fears. Rose was spending the day with Gus. The baby kicked steadily, reminding her time was not on her side. Nashville rose before her like a city from someone else's life, all tall buildings and morning traffic. She navigated unfamiliar streets to Jameson's address, acutely aware of how small she was, how vulnerable. The law offices occupied the 15th floor of a glass and steel tower. The reception area was all polished wood and leather furniture. The receptionist greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Whitmore has been expecting you." A door opened and a man emerged, mid-50s, silver hair, distinguished appearance in an expensive suit. But his eyes held kindness. "Mrs. Thorne," he crossed quickly to take her hand, "thank God you're safe. Please come to my office." He ushered her into a space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. "Nathaniel hired me 5 years ago. Everything was confidential, protected by attorney-client privilege. He was preparing for this moment, Mrs. Thorne, preparing for when he'd be gone and you'd need protection from dangers he could only partially explain." Eva sank into a leather chair. Jameson pulled out a thick file. William Blackwood spent 20 years trying to prove Helena murdered his son. 20 years of private investigators, forensic consultants, witness interviews, financial audits. He built a case that would convince any reasonable person. But Helena has connections in law enforcement, judiciary, government at state and federal level. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. So William decided to use the one weapon she couldn't corrupt, his will. He opened the file, turning it so Eva could see page after page of financial documents. Helena embezzled $8.3 million from Blackwood Industries over 15 years. William documented every transaction. Shell companies, fake vendors, inflated contracts, all funneling money into offshore accounts in her name. He wanted to prosecute, but exposing the embezzlement would destroy the company's reputation. Void contracts worth hundreds of millions put thousands out of work. So he chose a different path. He produced another document in blue legal covers. This is William's last will and testament, filed with probate court but sealed per his instructions until Nathaniel's death. It gives everything, $75 million in Blackwood Manor, to Nathaniel, then to you as his widow. Helena gets nothing. Clarence gets nothing. The will explicitly states this is due to credible evidence of criminal conduct. Eva's mouth felt dry. What do I have to do? First, we retrieve the evidence from the safety deposit box. Nathaniel was specific. Everything must be in your physical possession before we proceed. Then we go to Blackwood Manor and you take formal possession. After that, we file protective orders and custody declarations and prepare for Helena's counterattack, because she will attack. He retrieved a document from his desk drawer. This is your authorization to access Box 347 at First Federal Bank. We should go now, immediately. First Federal Bank was a grand old building, all marble columns and brass fixtures. Eva climbed its wide steps with Jameson, clutching the authorization and key, heart hammering. When Eva approached customer service, the young man's expression shifted from professional welcome to something like alarm. He read the authorization twice, hands trembling as he made a phone call in a voice too low to hear. An older man appeared, introducing himself as assistant manager. He led them through a heavy door and down a corridor, his anxiety palpable. His eyes darted to security cameras, rushing them along with haste born of fear. The vault's massive steel door looked like it belonged in a movie. Inside, box 347 sat in the middle row. The manager used Eva's key and his master key to open it, sliding out a long metal container to a small private room. "Take all the time you need," though his tone suggested the opposite. Jameson waited until the door closed. "This is it. Everything Nathaniel and William compiled to protect you and destroy Helena. Are you ready?" Eva's hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside were layers of Nathaniel's secrets. Multiple sealed envelopes labeled evidence, financial records, personal testimony, a thick folder bound with rubber bands, a small USB drive, and nestled among all this, a velvet jewelry box. Jameson began removing items methodically. He opened the first envelope, breath-catching. Medical examiner's report from Richard Blackwood's death. Originally ruled accidental fall, but the ME noted inconsistencies overruled by the lead detective. And here, witness statement from a housekeeper who saw Helena and Richard arguing violently 30 minutes before his death. She was paid $50,000 3 days later and signed an NDA. He opened another envelope, face cycling through shock and anger. Financial forensics. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, wire transfers from Blackwood Industries that don't match legitimate business expenses. $8.3 million over 15 years. Bank statements showing money flowing into accounts controlled by Helena. "This is prosecutable fraud, Eva. This is prison time." He set down the USB drive carefully. Nathaniel's video testimony, made 2 weeks before he died while legally competent. In Tennessee, this is admissible in court, even though he's deceased. Whatever is on this drive could be the most powerful weapon we have. Eva reached for the velvet box. Inside was a ring, Victorian era, intricate filigree surrounding a sapphire flanked by diamonds. Tucked beneath was a card in Nathaniel's handwriting. "For Rose, when she's old enough to understand what it means. This was my grandmother Catherine's engagement ring. Tell our daughter it comes from a woman who would have adored her." Eva felt tears threatening, but Jameson's voice pulled her back. "We need to photograph everything as backup, then take the originals. This has to be done correctly because Helena's lawyers will challenge chain of custody on everything. We need documentation at every step proving this is legitimate." 2 hours later, they had cataloged and photographed everything. Eva's head spun with the weight of what she now possessed. This wasn't just evidence, it was a complete roadmap to Helena's destruction. As they prepared to leave, the assistant manager appeared, face pale. "You should know, there have been inquiries about this box from Blackwood Industries Legal, from private investigators. We've refused all access per William Blackwood's specific instructions. But I've been pressured, threatened. My supervisor received a call from someone highly placed in state government, suggesting our banking license might come under review if we didn't cooperate." Jameson's voice was hard. "And did you cooperate?" The manager shook his head firmly. William Blackwood was very clear. Only Mrs. Thorne or her legal representative could access this box. I've honored that even though it's cost me professionally. But you need to leave now. I can't protect you beyond today. Eva burst through the bank's doors into cold afternoon air. Immediately, her eyes found what she'd been dreading. The black SUV parked across the street, dark windows reflecting the gray sky. Her heart lurched, but Jameson's hand on her elbow steadied her. "Walk normally. Don't run. Don't show fear. They want you panicked and making mistakes." They crossed with measured steps, Eva clutching the evidence bag like armor. The SUV's engine started as they reached Jameson's Mercedes. As he pulled out, the black vehicle followed, not hiding anymore, just following openly. A message. "We know where you are. We know what you're doing." Jameson drove with calm confidence, never speeding but maintaining purpose. The SUV stayed 3 car lengths back. They can't do anything in broad daylight on public streets. They're trying to intimidate us. The best response is to proceed as planned. We're going to Blackwood Manor now. You're going to see what you've inherited and take possession of your property. The drive took them into the Smoky Mountains, roads growing progressively narrower. The black SUV dropped back after 20 minutes, apparently satisfied it knew their destination. Trees closed in on both sides, the landscape remote and isolated. After 45 minutes, Jameson turned onto a private road marked only by a stone pillar with Blackwood carved into its weathered surface. The road wound through forest for 10 minutes before the trees parted. Blackwood Manor was a Victorian Gothic masterpiece that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. 3 stories of stone and wood, with wraparound porch, turrets at corners, and dozens of windows, many broken, some boarded. The grounds were overgrown with weeds. A fountain in the circular drive stood dry and cracked. Despite the decay, the house retained terrible beauty, like a grand dame fallen on hard times, but still carrying herself with remembered dignity. Jameson parked and turned to Eva. William built additions in the 50s and 60s. At its peak, this house had 12 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a ballroom, a library with over 5,000 volumes. Helena moved out 22 years ago after Richard died and never came back. She tried to have it demolished twice, but William prevented it through legal maneuvers. After he died, Nathaniel made sure it was transferred to you directly, bypassing probate. This is yours, Eva. Legally, unquestionably, yours. Eva climbed out slowly. The air smelled of pine and decay, wood smoke and earth and time. The front door, massive carved oak, hung slightly crooked. The chain and padlock Helena had installed now lay cut on the ground. They stepped inside. Eva's first impression was darkness and dust, and the ghost of vanished grandeur. The entry hall soared 2 stories to a coffered ceiling. A grand staircase swept upward in a graceful curve, its oak banisters solid beneath Eva's tentative touch. The floorboards creaked as they moved deeper, each step releasing small puffs of dust. The place felt frozen in time, abandoned suddenly. In the dining room, the table was still set for a meal that never happened. Jameson led Eva upstairs. On the second-floor landing, he turned down a hallway running the length of the west wing. At its end was a door different from the others, heavier, darker wood, with a large brass lock. This is William's private study. He had it sealed after his cancer diagnosis, knowing Helena would search it if she could. Nathaniel helped him move everything inside and install this lock. Only 2 keys were ever made. You have one, and I have the other. Eva pulled out the smaller brass key marked Study. Her hand trembled as she inserted it. The mechanism was stiff, but turned with an audible click, and the door swung inward. The study was preserved as if under glass. Dust covered every surface, but beneath it, Eva could see a room that had been someone's sanctuary. A massive oak desk dominated the space. Bookshelves lined 3 walls floor to ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes and file boxes labeled by year. Filing cabinets stood in one corner. Jameson moved immediately to the filing cabinets. Whatever William kept in here is the original documentation, the source material for everything in the safety deposit box. If we can authenticate these documents, establish the chain of evidence, Helena won't be able to challenge it. This room is the foundation of everything. Eva was drawn to the desk. She picked up the top folder and opened it, reading William's handwriting on yellowed pages. Journal entries, dated and methodical, detailing every step of his investigation. The first entry was from October 2002, weeks after Richard died. Richard is dead. The official story is accidental fall, but I don't believe it. I've known Helena for 33 years, watched her manipulate and scheme since the day Richard introduced us. She married him for the Blackwood name and money. He was talking about divorce, said he'd discovered financial irregularities. 2 days later, he fell downstairs and broke his neck. Too convenient. Eva turned pages, reading William's growing conviction. He described hiring investigators, interviewing staff, reviewing medical records. Every promising lead would evaporate, witnesses recanted, documents vanished, officials became uncooperative. But William documented each dead end, each suspicious coincidence. A later entry from 1995 revealed the embezzlement discovery. She's been stealing from the company. $8 million over 10 years, possibly more. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, fake contracts, money disappearing into accounts she controls. I confronted her privately, threatened prosecution. She looked me in the eye and smiled, said if I exposed her, she would destroy the company's reputation and put 3,000 people out of work. She would burn it all down rather than face consequences. And I believe her. Eva set the journal down, hands shaking. This was the woman who had thrown her and Rose into the street. Jameson was photographing file labels. We should leave before dark. The house has no electricity, no running water. It needs extensive work before it's livable. But Eva, the minute you move in here, even in these conditions, you establish possession. Helena can't claim you're homeless or unstable when you're living in a family estate worth millions. We need to get you and Rose here as soon as possible. Can you give me a few days? To prepare Rose, gather our things. Jameson nodded. 3 days. This weekend, I'll arrange for moving service and basic supplies. Monday at the latest, you need to be living here. Because Helena's lawyers will file their custody motion early next week, and when they do, we need to already be on offense. The drive back happened in near silence. The black SUV picked them up again as they entered city limits, following them to the bus station. Before Eva left his car, Jameson handed her a thick envelope. $5,000 in cash. From the legal fund William established. Use it to settle your affairs, move to the manor, and survive until the inheritance clears probate. And Eva, he gripped her hand tightly. What you're walking into, it's not just a legal battle. Helena has killed before. She'll kill again if she feels threatened enough. Once you claim that house and that money, you become an existential threat to her freedom. Be careful. The bus ride back felt longer. Eva clutched the evidence bag against her chest, the velvet box with Catherine's ring in her coat pocket, Jameson's $5,000 divided between multiple inner pockets. Dorothy and Gus were waiting when Eva climbed the stairs. Rose was already asleep. Eva showed them the letter, described the bank vault in Blackwood Manor, explained about the $75 million and the evidence and the battle coming. So you're moving to that house? Dorothy's voice made it a statement. Monday, Jameson is arranging movers and supplies. I need to establish possession before Helena files her custody motion. Gus leaned back, his weathered face thoughtful. That house has been empty 22 years. The structure is probably sound, William built to last, but systems will need work. Electricity, plumbing, heating. He paused, meeting Eva's eyes. I worked on that house in the 80s. William hired me for renovations after Richard died. I know every inch of that place. I'm 72 and retired, but I'm not dead. If you'll have me, I'll get that house livable for you and your kids. I can't pay you, not until the inheritance clears. Gus waved a hand dismissively. William Blackwood gave me steady work for 20 years, paid me fair wages when other contractors were exploiting workers. I owe him, and by extension, I owe his grandson's widow. Consider it a debt repaid. Dorothy stood, pulling Eva to her feet and wrapping her in a hug. You go to that house, you fight that evil woman, and you remember you're not alone. This town has seen the Blackwood name on charity foundations and scholarship funds for 3 generations. William was good to people here. Helena is a cancer we'll be glad to see cut out. That night, Eva lay on the couch, listening to Rose's peaceful breathing and feeling the baby move inside her. In 3 days, everything would change again. She would leave this small, safe space and move into a mansion filled with ghosts and secrets and the accumulated evidence of murder. But she would also stop running. She would stop hiding. She would become what Nathaniel and William had needed her to be. Someone brave enough to use the weapons they had left behind. Someone strong enough to face down a killer. Someone determined enough to protect her children, no matter the cost. Tomorrow she would tell Rose they were moving to a big house in the mountains. Tomorrow she would begin gathering their possessions. Tomorrow she would start becoming the woman this fight required her to be. The envelope from Nathaniel sat empty on the table. The keys glinted in moonlight. And outside, somewhere in darkness, Helena Blackwood was planning her next move, unaware that the frightened widow she had underestimated was about to claim the one thing Helena valued more than anything, the power to destroy her completely. The moving truck arrived at Blackwood Manor on Monday morning under skies threatening rain. Eva watched from the sagging porch as Gus directed two young men he'd hired. Their belongings barely filled one corner of the truck bed, a humiliating testament to how little they had. But Gus had added his own contributions: tools and lumber, space heaters and camping lanterns, a generator that rumbled to life, filling the air with the smell of gasoline and purpose. Rose stood beside Eva, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide as she stared up at the Victorian Gothic structure. It looks like a castle, but a sad one. Eva knelt beside her daughter, ignoring her 8-month pregnant body's protest. It's sad because it's been alone for a long time, but we're going to make it happy again. We're going to fill it with life and love. Rose considered this seriously. Did Daddy live here when he was little? He did. Let's find his old room first. Would you like that? The girl nodded, fear replaced by tentative curiosity. They climbed the front steps together, footfalls echoing on wood that groaned but held. Inside, Dorothy was already attacking decades of grime with focused determination. She had closed the diner for the day, an unprecedented act. Gus appeared from deeper in the house, cobwebs clinging to his white hair. Electrical panel is in the basement. Main breaker was shut off, but wiring looks surprisingly good. Copper, properly grounded, updated in the 90s. I can have power running to essential circuits by tonight. Plumbing is another story. Well pump seized, but it's salvageable. Hot water heater is dead. We'll manage with cold water until I can install a new heater tomorrow. His matter-of-fact recitation made everything feel manageable. Eva had given him $2,000 from Jameson's cash envelope, and he had accepted with a gruff nod that acknowledged this was business, not charity. Eva guided Rose upstairs. They found Nathaniel's childhood room in the East Wing, identifiable by baseball pennants and posters of late 90s bands. The room had good bones, hardwood floors, large windows offering views of forested mountains, built-in bookshelves flanking a small fireplace. Eva opened the closet and found Nathaniel's childhood wardrobe frozen in time. On the top shelf, a shoebox caught her attention. She pulled it down and opened it. Ticket stubs, a dried corsage, photographs of Nathaniel with friends, and at the bottom, a journal with a cheap leather cover. She sat on the dusty bed and opened it at random, landing on an entry dated October 2002, when Nathaniel would have been 12. Dad died today. Mom says it was an accident, but Clarence saw her push him. I saw it too. We heard them fighting. Dad said he was going to tell Grandfather about the money. Mom got so angry. Her face changed. She pushed him and he fell and fell and fell. Now Dad is dead and Mom told us if we ever tell anyone what we saw, we'll have accidents too. Clarence is crying all the time. I don't cry anymore. I'm too scared to cry. Eva's vision blurred and she closed the journal quickly, setting it aside before Rose could see. This was the burden Nathaniel had carried for 24 years, watching his father murdered, living with the killer, choosing between truth and survival. By nightfall, Gus had restored electricity to 3 rooms: Nathaniel's bedroom, the kitchen, and William's study. Dorothy had cleaned the kitchen enough that its mid-century appliances gleamed. The ancient stove worked when Gus coaxed it to life. They ate together at the massive dining room table after clearing away dust. Eva, Rose, Dorothy, Gus, and his two hired men. The meal was simple but abundant. Roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans. It felt ceremonial, this first dinner in Blackwood Manor in over 2 decades. After the workers left and Dorothy departed, Eva and Rose settled into Nathaniel's old room. She had made up the bed with fresh linens, and the space heater took enough chill from the air to make sleep possible. Rose curled against her mother, eyes heavy. "Are we safe here, Mommy?" The question cut through Eva's carefully maintained facade. She wanted to lie, to offer false reassurance. "I'm going to do everything I can to keep us safe. And we have friends helping us. Miss Dorothy and Mr. Gus and Mr. Whitmore. We're not alone anymore." Rose seemed to accept this, and within minutes, her breathing deepened. Eva lay awake longer, listening to the house settle around them, creaks and groans that could have been old wood or could have been something else. The next 3 days passed in a blur of physical labor. Dorothy and Gus worked with focused intensity, transforming Blackwood Manor room by room. By Wednesday evening, they had cleared and cleaned 4 bedrooms, both upstairs bathrooms, the kitchen, dining room, library, and William's study. The library especially revealed itself as a treasure. 5,000 volumes, many first editions worth substantial amounts. Eva found herself drawn here during breaks, running her fingers along leather spines, imagining William Blackwood reading late into the night. On Thursday morning, Jameson arrived with a professional photographer and videographer. They spent 4 hours documenting every room, capturing progress, establishing visual evidence that Eva was actively restoring and inhabiting the property. The photographer took particular care with Rose's bedroom and the nursery Eva was preparing. After the photographers left, Jameson sat with Eva in the library. Helena's lawyers filed their emergency custody motion yesterday. The hearing is scheduled for next Monday, 5 days from now. They're claiming you're living in an uninhabitable structure, exposing Rose to dangerous conditions, demonstrating poor judgment that requires the state to grant Helena temporary custody pending evaluation. Eva's hands tightened on the chair arms. "But we're making it habitable. You have photos." Jameson nodded, expression grave. "We do, and we'll present those along with testimony from Dorothy and Gus. But Eva, you need to understand what Helena is really doing. The custody motion is theater. She knows she can't win permanent custody. What she's trying to do is create leverage. If she gets temporary custody, she can drag out the legal battle for months or years, bleeding the estate dry with legal fees, hoping you'll eventually settle and give her a portion just to make it stop. So what do? We go on offense. This weekend, I'm filing our own motions. We're presenting William's will to the court, along with all the evidence of Helena's embezzlement and the substantial questions about Richard's death. We're not just defending, we're accusing her of murder and financial crimes. We're forcing her to respond to our narrative." He pulled out a USB drive and set it on the table. "I had our tech consultant review Nathaniel's video testimony. Eva, it's 43 minutes of your husband calmly and methodically describing everything he witnessed the night Richard died, everything he endured in the years after. It's devastating testimony, and because it was recorded while he was legally competent and aware he was dying, it's admissible. The judge will watch this, and there's no way she'll see Helena as a concerned grandmother after hearing Nathaniel describe growing up in constant fear of being murdered by his own mother." Eva stared at the USB drive, simultaneously wanting to watch it and terrified of what she would see. "There's one more thing," Jameson's tone shifted. "We've been monitoring Helena's communications where we legally can. She's hired a crisis management firm, the kind that specializes in destroying reputations and manufacturing scandals. They're going to come after you, Eva. Your past, your character, anything they can twist. They'll talk to everyone you've ever known. They'll probably spread rumors, plant stories with sympathetic media." Dorothy's voice came from the doorway. "Let them try. This town remembers William Blackwood's generosity. We remember the scholarships he funded, the hospital wing he paid for. And we know Helena for exactly what she is, a carpetbagger who married into the Blackwood name. She has no allies here, only employees. Jameson smiled at Dorothy's fierce declaration. She's right. Geography matters in family court. Judge Catherine Reynolds is a local, appointed by local politicians, sensitive to local sentiment. If the community rallies behind you, it influences the case. We need character witnesses, people willing to testify about your mothering, your work ethic, your stability. Can you provide those? Eva thought about the people who had helped her. Dorothy and Gus, the doctor at the clinic, the motel clerk, customers at the diner. A network of support she hadn't realized she was building. I can, not can, will. Jameson stood gathering papers. This weekend is critical. I need you to rest, prepare mentally for Monday. Be ready to sit in that courtroom and face Helena without flinching. She'll be there, perfectly coiffed and expensively dressed, playing concerned grandmother. You need to be the mother protecting her children from a known threat. Strong, composed, unshakable. Can you do that? Eva thought about Nathaniel's journal entry, about an 8-year-old boy so terrified he stopped crying. She thought about Rose sleeping upstairs, about the baby who would never meet his father, but deserved to inherit something more than fear. I can do that, because I don't have any other choice. Friday morning brought unexpected visitors. Eva was in the kitchen when she heard vehicles in the driveway, multiple vehicles, engines idling. She moved to the window, and her breath caught. 3 black SUVs parked in the circular drive. Men in dark suits emerged, at least 8 of them, and one woman Eva recognized from photographs. Helena's lead attorney, Victoria Brennan. Gus appeared from the basement, tools in hand, face darkening. Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'll handle this. But Eva found herself moving toward the front door instead, something hardening inside her chest. She had spent weeks running and hiding. Nathaniel and William had given her weapons. It was time to stop cowering. She opened the door before they could knock, stepping onto the porch with Gus flanking her. Victoria Brennan smiled, all teeth and no warmth. Mrs. Thorne, I'm Victoria Brennan, representing Helena Blackwood. We need to discuss your illegal occupation of this property. Eva kept her voice level despite the fear trying to crawl up her throat. This property belongs to me as Nathaniel Blackwood's widow. I have documentation proving legal ownership. You're trespassing. Victoria's smile widened. That's actually why we're here. Mrs. Blackwood is contesting the transfer of this property, claiming it was obtained through fraud and undue influence. Until the matter is resolved in probate court, we're requesting you vacate. We have a court order authorizing us to secure the property pending resolution. She held out papers, but Eva didn't reach for them. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed Jameson, putting it on speaker. Mr. Whitmore, I have Victoria Brennan and several associates at Blackwood Manor claiming they have a court order to remove me. Jameson's voice came through clear and sharp. Put Ms. Brennan on the phone. Victoria took the phone, expression flickering with annoyance. Jameson, always a pleasure. The order you're attempting to serve is invalid. Judge Reynolds already denied Helena's motion for immediate possession, citing Eva Thorne's documented legal ownership as Nathaniel Blackwood's widow. Whatever paperwork you're waving around was issued by a different judge who lacked jurisdiction. If you attempt to remove Mrs. Thorne from her legal residence, you'll be committing forcible eviction, which is both a civil and criminal offense in this state. I suggest you leave now before I have you arrested for harassment and trespassing. Victoria's professional mask cracked, fury showing through. This isn't over, Jameson. No, it's not. But this particular skirmish is. Enjoy the drive back to Nashville. The call ended. Eva took her phone back, meeting Victoria's glare with steadiness she didn't entirely feel. As Mr. Whitmore explained, "You're trespassing on private property. Leave now or I'll call the sheriff." The standoff lasted 30 seconds before Victoria made a sharp gesture. They retreated to their vehicles with coordinated precision, but Eva could feel the hostility radiating from them. As the SUVs pulled away, Gus let out a breath. "That woman is dangerous, and she'll be back. Let her come. This is my house now. They don't get to intimidate me in my own home." The words felt powerful, a declaration of territory and intention. Somewhere in the past month, she had stopped being the frightened widow who let herself be pushed around. Saturday brought different visitors, the kind Eva welcomed. Dorothy arrived with 5 women from town, all equipped with cleaning supplies and determination. They spread through Blackwood Manor like a benevolent army. While they worked, they shared stories about William Blackwood, how he had paid for one woman's cancer treatment, how he had saved another's family farm, how he had funded the scholarship program at the local high school for 20 years. By afternoon, a dozen more people had appeared. Former Blackwood Industries employees, business owners from town, even the mayor, all offering help and support. Some brought furniture, others brought groceries. Still others simply offered their presence as character witnesses. The message was clear. Eva had allies. As the sun set Saturday evening, Eva stood on the front porch watching the last volunteers depart, and Blackwood Manor looked transformed. The windows gleamed, the porch had been swept clean, the overgrown gardens cut back to reveal pathways underneath. Inside, rooms that had been tombs of dust now felt alive again. Rose appeared beside her, slipping a small hand into Eva's. "I like it here, Mommy. It feels like Daddy's with us." Eva squeezed her daughter's hand, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "He is with us, sweetheart, every day. In this house he grew up in the love he left us, in everything we're building here." Sunday was quiet by design, Jameson's instructions to rest before the hearing. Eva spent the morning in William's study, reading his journals, familiarizing herself with the evidence. The old man's handwriting became familiar, his voice clear through the pages. He had loved Richard deeply and never forgiven himself for not seeing Helena's true nature in time. In the afternoon, Eva finally gathered courage to watch Nathaniel's video testimony. She set up Jameson's laptop in the study, locked the door so Rose wouldn't intrude, and pressed play. Nathaniel's face filled the screen, gaunt from cancer, but his eyes clear and determined. "My name is Nathaniel William Blackwood, born June 15, 1990. I am recording this testimony on March 3, 2022, at Smoky Mountain Hospice Center. I am of sound mind and clear memory, though my body is failing. I am aware I am dying. I want my words to survive me." He detailed everything, the argument between Richard and Helena about missing money, the moment when Helena's face transformed from anger to cold calculation, the push that sent Richard tumbling down the grand staircase, the terrible stillness afterward. He described how Helena had looked at him and Clarence with eyes empty of remorse and told them they had seen nothing, how she had spent the next 24 years controlling them through fear. The most damning portion came near the end. "She told me directly that if grandfather left me anything in his will, I wouldn't live to inherit it. She said accidents happen to people who get in her way, and she had proven she could make accidents look convincing. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore, so I ran. I changed my name and built a life where she couldn't find me, where I could finally breathe without wondering if every day would be my last." Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears as he looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, Eva, then the cancer got me before she could. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth while I lived. I thought keeping you in the dark would keep you safe. I was wrong. She'll come for you and our children because that's what she does. She destroys anything that stands between her and money. But I left you weapons. Use them. Fight her. Win. Protect our babies. Don't let her take from them what she took from me. A childhood free of fear. A life lived in daylight instead of shadows." The video ended and Eva sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. This was what Jamison would show in court Monday. This was the testimony that would force Judge Reynolds to see Helena not as a concerned grandmother, but as a woman capable of murder. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Eva dressed in the navy suit Jamison had insisted she buy, modest jewelry Dorothy had loaned her, shoes that pinched but looked appropriate. She braided her hair, applied minimal makeup, transformed herself into the version of Eva Thorne who belonged in a courtroom. Rose stayed with Gus, who had promised cookies in movies. Dorothy drove Eva to the courthouse, her presence steadying as they navigated morning traffic and Eva's rising panic. The Davidson County Courthouse was an imposing brick structure. Eva climbed its wide steps with Dorothy beside her. At the top, Jamison waited, silver hair gleaming in morning sun, expression calm and confident. "Remember what I told you. Strong, composed, unshakable. You're not on trial here. Helena is. We're the ones presenting evidence of crimes. She's the one who should be frightened." The courtroom was smaller than Eva expected, wood-paneled and slightly shabby, with fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. Judge Catherine Reynolds presided from a raised bench, a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair, her face revealing nothing. The gallery was packed, divided between Eva's supporters and Helena's side. And there, at the defendant's table, sat Helena Blackwood. She wore a black suit that probably cost more than Eva's car, pearls at her throat, silver hair styled in soft waves, framing a face carefully composed into grandmotherly concern. She looked every inch the grieving matriarch worried about vulnerable grandchildren. Helena's eyes found Eva across the courtroom, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. The look she gave Eva was pure hatred distilled to its essence, a promise of destruction delivered in a glance lasting less than a second before the concerned grandmother expression returned. Judge Reynolds gavelled the hearing to order. This court is convened to hear emergency custody motion filed by Helena Blackwood regarding minors Rosalie Thorne and baby Thorne, unborn. Ms. Brennan, you may present your opening statement. Victoria Brennan stood and began building the narrative of Eva as unfit mother, citing the motel residence, the transient lifestyle, the exposure of a minor child to dangerous conditions at Blackwood Manor. She painted Eva as opportunistic and unstable, someone who had trapped Nathaniel Blackwood into marriage and was now trying to claim an inheritance she hadn't earned. Your Honor, my client wants nothing more than to protect her grandchildren from further trauma and instability. She's not seeking permanent custody, just temporary placement while Mrs. Thorne undergoes evaluation. Mrs. Blackwood has the resources, the stability, and most importantly, the genetic connection to these children. They are Blackwoods by blood, and they deserve the advantages that name can provide. Jamison rose when Victoria finished, and his opening was surgical in its precision. Your Honor, this case is not about custody. It's about a woman who murdered her husband 22 years ago, embezzled over $8 million from the family company, and is now trying to steal her grandchildren to maintain control over an inheritance she was specifically excluded from because of her crimes. The respondent, Eva Thorne, is not an unfit mother. She's the only thing standing between these children and a grandmother who has demonstrated her willingness to kill family members who inconvenience her. The courtroom erupted. Victoria was on her feet objecting, but Judge Reynolds gavelled them both to silence. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Whitmore. I assume you have evidence to support it? Jamison smiled, cold and triumphant. Substantial evidence, Your Honor. Video testimony from the deceased, financial records spanning 15 years, private investigator reports, and eyewitness accounts. We're prepared to prove not only that Mrs. Blackwood is unfit for custody, but that she should be facing criminal charges. Judge Reynolds leaned back. This hearing just became significantly more complicated. We'll proceed with testimony, but Mr. Whitmore, if you're going to accuse someone of murder in my courtroom, you better be able to back it up. Ms. Brennan, call your first witness. The next 2 hours were brutal. Victoria called a child psychologist who had never met Rose, but testified about potential trauma of living in an abandoned house undergoing renovation. She called a financial consultant who questioned how Eva could manage a $75 million inheritance when she'd been living in a motel weeks ago. She called a private investigator who had photographed Eva at her lowest moments, exhausted, disheveled, struggling. But Jameson's cross-examinations were devastating. He established that the psychologist's opinions were based entirely on information from Helena's legal team. He got the financial consultant to admit many inheritance recipients from poverty backgrounds successfully managed windfalls with proper advice. He forced the private investigator to acknowledge that following someone without their knowledge and photographing them could constitute stalking. When it was Jameson's turn, he started with photographs from Thursday, the documented transformation of Blackwood Manor from abandoned ruin to habitable home. He called Dorothy, who testified about Eva's work ethic, her dedication to Rose. He called Gus, who described the manor's structural soundness and Eva's active participation in restoration. He called the mayor, who spoke about William Blackwood's legacy and community support. Then Jameson approached the bench with the USB drive. Your Honor, I'd like to play video testimony from Nathaniel Blackwood, recorded 2 weeks before his death, while he was of sound mind and legally competent. The testimony is directly relevant to Helena Blackwood's fitness for custody and her motivations for seeking it. Victoria objected, but Judge Reynolds overruled her. I'll allow it. This court needs to understand the full context of this custody dispute. The lights dimmed, and Nathaniel's face appeared on the screen. Eva watched Helena's expression as her dead son began speaking. Watched the confident mask crack as Nathaniel described witnessing his father's murder. By the time the video reached the part where Nathaniel detailed Helena's threats, her explicit statements that accidents happen to people who get in her way, Helena's face had gone white, her hands gripping the table edge so tightly her knuckles showed bone white. The courtroom was utterly silent when the video ended. Judge Reynolds sat motionless for a long moment. Ms. Brennan, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to these allegations before I make any rulings. Does your client wish to testify? Victoria and Helena engaged in rapid, whispered conversation, Victoria clearly advising against it, Helena clearly insisting. Finally, Helena stood. I want to testify. I want to respond to these lies my son told while he was dying and not in his right mind. Victoria looked ill but gestured for Helena to approach the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in, and Helena sat with perfect posture, face arranged into wounded dignity. Jameson stood for cross-examination with calm confidence. Mrs. Blackwood, were you present when your husband Richard died in October 2002? Helena's voice was steady. I was in the house. I heard him fall. Did you see him fall? A pause, barely noticeable. No, I was in another room. Jameson produced a document. This is a statement from Maria Gonzalez, who worked as your housekeeper from 1985 to 2005. She states she heard you arguing with Richard at the top of the staircase minutes before his death. She saw you push him. Are you saying Ms. Gonzalez is lying? Helena's composure cracked slightly. Maria was fired for stealing. She's lying to get revenge. No police report was filed regarding this alleged theft. Why not? Helena's face hardened. I chose to handle it privately. I'm not in the habit of ruining people's lives over minor infractions. How generous. Jameson's tone was acid. Let's talk about the $8.3 million that disappeared from Blackwood Industries between 1985 and 2000. Can you explain those transactions? I don't know what you're talking about. Jameson produced page after page of bank records, corporate documents, wire transfer receipts. He walked Helena through each transaction, watching her become increasingly flustered, her answers contradicting each other. The final blow came when Jameson played audio recordings Nathaniel had made. Helena's voice captured clearly as she discussed eliminating problems and ensuring Nathaniel didn't live long enough to inherit anything. The sound of her own words, her own threats, spoken in her own voice, stripped away any remaining pretense. Helena stood abruptly from the witness stand, face contorted with rage. "That money is mine. I built that company. I earned it by putting up with Richard's weakness and William's sanctimony. I spent 35 years being the perfect Blackwood wife, and this is how I'm repaid? Some waitress gets everything while I get nothing?" Judge Reynolds was banging her gavel, but Helena had lost complete control. "You think you've won?" She pointed at Eva, voice rising to a scream. "You're nothing. A nobody who trapped my son with a pregnancy and now thinks you deserve to steal my life. I'll destroy you. I'll take those children and you'll never see them again, just like I made sure Richard would never interfere with my plans again." The courtroom exploded. Bailiffs moved to restrain Helena as she continued screaming. Victoria was on her feet, frantically trying to contain damage. Judge Reynolds gavelled repeatedly, demanding order. And Eva sat frozen, watching her husband's mother complete a full breakdown that made everything Nathaniel had said undeniably, horrifically true. When order was finally restored and Helena forcibly removed to a holding cell, Judge Reynolds looked exhausted. "I'm going to need time to review all this evidence before making any rulings, but I'm issuing an emergency order right now. Helena Blackwood is prohibited from any contact with Rosalie Thorne or baby Thorne. There will be no temporary custody, no visitation, no communication of any kind. Bailiff, contact the district attorney's office. Based on what I've heard today, there are substantial grounds for criminal investigation." She looked at Eva with something that might have been compassion. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm granting you full temporary custody of your children. The court will reconvene in 30 days for a final hearing on permanent custody, but barring any extraordinary circumstances, I see no reason that won't be granted. Your husband left you substantial evidence of his mother's crimes. Use it to protect your family." Court was adjourned, and Eva sat motionless as the room emptied. She had won. Helena was facing criminal prosecution. The children were safe. But she felt numb rather than triumphant, hollow rather than victorious. Because winning meant accepting that Nathaniel's entire childhood had been a nightmare. Dorothy's arm came around her shoulders. "You did it. You fought and you won." Eva turned to her friend, the numbness finally cracking. "I just watched a woman confess to murdering her husband and threatening to kill her son. How is that winning?" Dorothy's grip tightened. "Because now she can't hurt anyone else. Because your children are safe. Because sometimes winning looks like survival, and survival is enough." Outside the courthouse, news crews had gathered. Eva ignored their shouted questions, climbing into Dorothy's car. The house rose from the trees as they approached, and for the first time Eva saw it not as a fortress or burden, but simply as home. The place where she and Rose and the coming baby would build something new. 3 weeks later, Eva stood in the library, holding tea, and watching through the window as contractors worked on the exterior, replacing broken windows and rotted wood. The work was funded by an advance against the inheritance, which had begun clearing probate now that Helena's contest had been dismissed. Helena herself was in county jail awaiting trial on charges of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, and conspiracy. Clarence had entered witness protection after agreeing to testify against his mother. The district attorney had called it the most clear-cut murder prosecution she had seen in 20 years. Rose was settling into life at the manor with childhood's resilience. She had claimed 3 rooms, a bedroom, a playroom, and her art studio, and filled them with chaotic creativity. The nightmares had lessened. The bedwetting had stopped. She laughed again, real laughter from somewhere deep and genuine. The baby had arrived 2 weeks ago, a boy Eva named Daniel William Thorne, honoring both his father and great-grandfather. He slept now in the nursery Eva had prepared in what had been Nathaniel's childhood room, surrounded by walls his father had once looked at, living the safe childhood Nathaniel had been denied. Jameson arrived that afternoon with papers for Eva to sign, the final documents establishing the trust that would manage the inheritance for the children, the foundation Eva was creating to help women escaping domestic violence, the scholarships in Nathaniel and William's names. You've handled this with remarkable grace. Most people who suddenly inherit this kind of money lose themselves in it. You've used it as a tool rather than letting it use you. Eva looked around the library at the thousands of books William had collected. It's not really mine. It's something I'm holding for the next generation. Nathaniel and William both understood that money is just a weapon. It can protect or destroy depending on who wields it. I'm trying to make sure I wield it the way they would have wanted. After Jameson left, Eva climbed to William's study. She sat at his desk and pulled out his journal, opening to the final entry he had written the week before he died. If you're reading this, then my grandson found a woman worthy of trust. Take care of him, stranger. He carries wounds that may never fully heal, but love can bridge what pain has fractured. And if something happens to Nathaniel, if Helena succeeds in destroying him, as she destroyed Richard, then fight for his children. Don't let her win. The Blackwood name has been stained with blood and theft, but it began with honest labor and genuine compassion. Return it to those roots. Use what I've left you to build something better than what we had. Eva closed the journal and looked out the window at the mountains rising in the distance. Somewhere out there, Nathaniel had run 7 years ago, fleeing from a mother who wanted him dead. He had found Eva in a bookstore and built 3 years of peace before cancer took him. But in dying, he had given her something more valuable than money, the truth and the weapons to fight with it. She would raise their children here, in this house that had witnessed so much pain, and she would fill it with enough love and light and laughter to banish the ghosts that lingered in its corners. She would use the fortune to help others who were running from monsters, knowing that sometimes the difference between escape and capture was having someone believe your story and give you the resources to fight back. And every day she would remember that the inheritance Nathaniel truly left her wasn't measured in dollars. It was the courage to open that envelope when she had no other choice. It was the strength to walk into a courtroom and face down a killer. It was the determination to become not the victim of someone else's cruelty, but the architect of her own survival. The house stood strong around her, no longer sad but filled again with purpose. And Eva Thorne, formerly terrified widow, now fierce mother and protector, understood finally what Nathaniel had meant in his final letter. Sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to fight like hell for the living.